Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today I'm going to be taking a look at one of the best arcade shooters from Sega that was later ported to the Dreamcast in the late 90s as a launch title for the console. That game in question is the House of the Dead 2. I want to see if it still holds up as one of the best arcade ports and why you should consider giving the Sega Dreamcast version a chance. So get those quarters ready because we're about to take a trip back to 1999. House of the Dead 2 was originally released in arcades back in 1998 and would be a follow-up to the first game released a couple years prior to that and continue the same story that was in that game as well. It is your typical arcade shooter similar to Time Crisis, only as the title suggests, it would feature zombies instead. However, this was not the first zombie arcade shooter to be released, as a few years prior to this, there was a game called Zombie Raid, which basically was a 2D House of the Dead game if you really look at it that way. But about 10 years prior to House of the Dead, there was a game released from SNK called Beast Busters. And I remember playing this in the arcade once when I was a kid, but I didn't remember what the name of the game was until a few years ago when the SNK collection came out. And as I'm playing this game, I realized, you know what, they took a lot of inspiration from this game and used it in House of the Dead too. There is a spot where zombies are driving cars in this game as well, and I still don't understand why or how zombies know how to drive cars. But then again, when you watch Land of the Dead, zombies are using guns in that game. Now, House of the Dead 2 would actually be released on the Dreamcast back in 1999 alongside the console's launch. So what made this home version so much fun? Now, there were two options. There's multiple gameplay styles in this game, but there were two modes that I played the most, and that was the arcade mode, which is your standard arcade mode that you would see in the arcades, and then there was an original mode made just for the Dreamcast version. And I'm going to talk about both of these and see what made both of them so much fun. So with that being said, let's jump into some gameplay. The arcade mode is pretty much what you would expect, the version that you spent so many quarters and tokens on, whether it was Dave & Buster's, Chuck E. Cheese, the arcade at the mall, wherever this game was available, but in the comfort of your own home. You will go through 4 stages, each with multiple paths that you can take, depending on how you go about taking care of the zombies. Now, I will say that there are some levels, especially the second level, where there's a key on the floor, and if you don't shoot it in time, it'll take you to the random generated level to the left instead of the right, so it's a pathway. You can either go to the left or the right, the easy path or the hard path, and if you don't shoot that key, it actually takes you to the harder pathway if you ask me, so you want to try and shoot that key if you see it. Now, in typical arcade fashion, each level does feature civilians that you must save, but you have to be quick to save them as they can get attacked pretty fast and you might miss out on saving them. It is really recommended to save anyone in trouble as they sometimes give you a life up, and believe me, you will need them in this game because there are some levels where you have about 3 or 4 zombies trying to attack you at once, and some of the bosses attack pretty fast too, so it's really easy to get hit and lose out on those lives. Now, speaking of bosses, each level does end with a boss fight, which starts off fairly easy, and then they start jumping around the screen and it gets a little bit more difficult because a lot of the bosses have weak points of being their head or their face or somewhere that's really hard for you to hit. Much like the chainsaw boss, his weak point is his face. The Emperor, his weak point is his heart, and then the second to last boss, his weak point is his shoulder, his knee, and then a weak point near his heart. He looks kind of like Tyrant from Resident Evil, and I know that he moves around the screen a lot, so it's really hard to get a hit on him, especially if you're playing on the Dreamcast with a controller. Very hard to get a hit in on him. Now, after each level ends, you are greeted to a splash screen showing you the score and accuracy that you got throughout that level, as well as everybody that you saved. Now, should you save everybody, or at least most of them, they will give you another life up. So you want to try and save as many people as you can, and I believe the number is about 4 or 5 people, and they give you a life up. Now, if you get 1 or 2, you really don't get any life up from them. And that's pretty much arcade mode in a nutshell. It was a fun mode if you just want to play a quick game, but what about the original mode for the Dreamcast? What made that mode so much fun? And now we come to the original mode. This is the mode that was always added into games from companies for the home console versions because they wanted people to keep coming back and keep playing these games instead of just buying it, completing it in 30 minutes, and then returning it, or renting it from Blockbuster and completing it in a day and then returning it. They wanted people to keep coming back, so they would always add in original mode or boss rush mode, which is also a mode in this game, but I won't be talking about that in this video. Now, for original mode, something that was really cool about this were the item drops. And Zombie Revenge did this same thing, but I'm going to cover that in a future episode. For House of the Dead 2, they gave you things such as grenade launchers, machine guns, enhanced handgun ammo, extra points, bonus credits, and then my favorite being unlimited credits that I always used every time I had it available. Now, something to keep in mind for this mode is that you can only keep 2 items at once when you're playing original mode. So what I like to do, and I really recommend a lot of people do this too, is to get one of the special weapons, either the grenade launcher or the machine gun, because it'll really help with trying to unlock other items that you see throughout the game. Because you'll be going through the levels, you'll see a little coin pop up in the corner and you want to hit it, but say you move over with the handgun and you're trying to shoot it, but then the camera pans off to the right and you miss it. If you're playing with a controller, the cursor can kind of be finicky and really not take you where you want to go, and then the camera will pan left or right when you don't want it to, because again, it's an arcade on rails shooter, so it's going to do that. But I like to use the grenade launcher because it has that wide range of attack and it can get pretty much everything that you're trying to get in one corner. Zombies, unlockables, items, whatever you're trying to get in that corner will get hit and unlocked and collected by the grenade launcher blast. Same with the machine gun. You can basically go through and just keep shooting, and I believe there is also an unlockable where there is no reload. If I remember correctly, there is one that is no reload and you can just keep shooting as much as you want. Even if you have the handgun, you can keep shooting as much as you want to get whatever you want on screen. So it's really good to use a machine gun for that, because you can just keep moving the cursor and blasting everything, trying to get everything unlocked that you see on screen at once. So I like to use the special weapons from our first slot, and then the second slot I always use either the unlimited credits if I have them, or the extra credits, which sometimes is about 9 credits or 8 credits I believe it was. And I like to use those because I want to get as far into the game as possible while unlocking as much as I can throughout the playthrough. Because the last thing you want is to get a game over in the middle of an arcade game, especially if you're going to play it on a stream or something. You don't want to complete it all at once. You want to get everything possible. You want to get that beginning to end, point A to point B ending. Now, something cool about this mode on the Wii version, and I believe it was also the same in the Xbox version of House of the Dead 3, because this game was an unlockable in that game as well. The cool thing is your start is House of the Dead 3, and then you'll be like, I want to play House of the Dead 2. So you switch, and then you go into an elevator. You'll see the characters from House of the Dead 3 say, okay, well, we'll see you later. As you're in the elevator, you're going down, and each time it stops at a floor, there's a bunch of zombies there, and you can either choose to shoot them, or you can see the items in the corners of the screen. You can choose to shoot them and get those items at the same time, and it's really good to have 2 people playing that one, because one can shoot the zombies and then one can get the item unlocks and everything. And I believe it's like 3 floors if I'm not mistaken, and then it goes to the game itself. And they didn't have that in the Dreamcast version, so that was something that I always thought was cool, because you could get unlockables before you even started the game, and you could have a grenade launcher before you even start the game. It was so cool to have that option to do that. Okay, so one last thing I want to bring up about the original mode and the unlockables is the costumes you can get in this game. So you can go through the game playing as G, or Amy, or Harry, or even a zombie, I believe. And one special costume that you can get in the game is actually Rogan, but you can't get that until you're at the end of the game on the last level. There's a series of hallways you go through, and I want to say they were prison cells, but there's zombies coming out of the left and right. There is one door at the very end of this hallway on the right, and if you meet some kind of criteria, I cannot remember what it was because it was always random for me. I always got it when I wasn't trying to. And a maid from House of the Dead 1 shows up, and she says, here you go, you can use this later. And it's the Rogan costume. It's just cool to use that costume because Rogan and G were 2 of the original characters. Obviously, Rogan does not show up in House of the Dead 2 unless you're using that costume, obviously. With that being said, we've come to the end of the video, and I want to give my final thoughts on this game and what I think about it today. This was always a fun game to play in arcades, and the home version still holds up and is still just as fun as it was back in 1999. This one is definitely worth a pickup, and you should really check it out if you're a fan of the House of the Dead series. There are a few different versions to pick up. The game is actually available on the Sega Dreamcast, as I reviewed in the video, as well as the Nintendo Wii in the House of the Dead 2 and 3 Return Collection, as well as House of the Dead 3 as a hidden unlockable in the original Xbox version, which is pretty cool because, like I said, that's the same version that is within the Wii version. They basically took both of those games, put them into one package, and sold it as a collection. That's why House of the Dead 1 is not in there. And that's a whole other story on why House of the Dead 1 is actually getting a remake and why we've not seen any ports of that game, which I will cover in a future episode. Now, there is one mode that I didn't talk about, which is the Boss Rush mode. It's really fun to play that mode, especially if you want to get your high score up and beat your high scores from the previous boss fights. Definitely check that one out because it'll give you a little bit of practice on the bosses too, for when you actually do play the arcade and original modes. That way you can know when to hit the weak spots, when to get the timing right and everything. So I really suggest playing that one as well. I just didn't want to cover it because I figured I was going to be covering the bosses anyways, so I just wanted to tackle those in one thing and then mention this briefly at the end. But guys, that brings us to the end of the episode. And I'd like to know, what is your favorite arcade shooter? It does not have to be House of the Dead. It can be anything from Time Crisis to Crisis Zone, Silent Scope, any arcade shooter that you are a fan of, let me know down in the comments below. I would like to thank you again for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I always enjoy making these videos because it gives me a chance to revisit the past and introduce these older games to a newer audience who might be interested in trying them out for themselves. But it also gives me a chance to bring back the memories to those older fans who used to play these games back in the 90s and early 2000s, such as myself. But as always, guys, be sure to hit that thumbs up and ring that bell to be notified of when videos go live. Share with your friends and family, and I'll see you next time.